Great. Sure. I think that I think this is a tough question. The reason why I say that is because what these sheets now do, in a great way, I think a positive way, is it opens up this kind of clarity to each part of the ensemble, as opposed to just a general judge sitting up there and going, what do I hear from everything that's there, without guidance. I like that this gives you more guidance. I like that it gives you direct things, not only as a judge, but also as an educator, to help dictate how you're rehearsing and what you're listening for. So when I look at the sheet and I'm thinking about the items that are on here, for me it's more about how those items relate and have relation to each other. Thinking about, is the percussion ensemble, there's obvious moments of, you hear it all the time, of overbalanced percussion ensemble or electronics on a sheet, but how are those things happening organically with each other? And are you purposely creating moments within the program to allow for each of those elements to be heard? Are you purposely guiding your teaching? Are you purposely guiding the performance and what's being written to allow for moments of total transparency and clarity? Is each of those elements clearly being taught that the articulation and the style and the length of the note is exactly the same from ensemble to ensemble, from the bass drum player all the way to the flute player in a feature, that there's clarity from one side of the program all the way to the other? What do you guys got?
Yeah, so specific to the area sheet, I think it's, as an adjudicator, it's a challenge, because you want to keep integrity of each of these subcaptions, and you also want to look at the whole picture. I think as you go through the program, it's important you take opportunities to not get too hung up in sampling one thing that you miss another. You want to take opportunities to really dig into the woodwind sound, really dig into the brass sound, really dig into the percussion sound, and of course the effective use of electronics should they be choosing to use electronic reinforcement. I think it's important that you, as you wrap up listening to the ensemble, that you give yourself enough time to accurately look at each box when you're looking at that area sheet, which for any of us that have judged area, we know that's a challenge. You've got a short amount of time, and you want to really give each subcaption its specific due and integrity. But from a judging perspective, I think making sure you've got your due diligence and that you're constantly sampling around the ensemble, never allowing yourself to get hung up in one spot, makes you a lot more successful at the end as you go from caption to caption to caption to caption. I do think, the new sheet gives us an opportunity to, as a director, looking specifically at the area sheet, to make sure that all the colors in the ensemble are present. And it gives the judge an opportunity to really sample all of the colors in the ensemble. So are we hearing, when we hear the electronic sounds and the amplification of the group, I know, if I think back to how we were amplifying our woodwind ensemble in 2016 at Vandegrift, it was not representative of how those instruments were supposed to sound, but I fast forward to some better choices that we made in 2017 or 2019, and I think we did a better job making a flute sound like a flute and making a clarinet sound like a clarinet. But I think that this is another thing that this sheet can give credit for, is making sure that we're making smart reinforcement decisions with electronics that also bleeds into, effective use of woodwind playing, or if I'm amplifying percussion, effective use of percussion performance. So yeah, on the director's side, I just think it's a great opportunity to help ensure that all of the colors are shining through in one single sheet.
Yeah, I really like what you're talking about reinforcement. To me, effective use of electronics, there's kind of three almost subcaptions, if you will. There's reinforcement, which is just taking acoustic instruments and making them able to be heard at the top of a giant football stadium, right? And then there's your soundscape, which is all of your synthesizers, your sound effects, all of those synthetic sounds. And then you've got kind of your processing, which is like you take an acoustic instrument and you run it through electronic to create a totally different sound. And I think when you're looking at really what is an effective use, looking at those three different things, not just is it blended well, balance is obviously something that we focus on a lot, but in addition to that, is the timbre correct? You know, does it sound like a flute? You know, the big thing when I'm reinforcing a sound is what I'll do is I'll have it, I'll get it all EQ'd up, reverb, whatever, and then you just turn it on and turn it off. And when it just sounds louder and softer, that's when you know you've got it. You know, all of these EQs and reverbs and all these things, those are tools that, you know, our ears hear an instrument versus a microphone. It's going to color the sound a little different. So those are tools, and the speakers color sound as well. So those are tools to fix the inaccuracies of those artificial elements replicating the sound. So, you know, when you're talking strictly reinforcement, you know, I think reverb is a big thing where sometimes we overdo it. You know, the purpose of reverb is so it sounds like what you're seeing, you know. So if you've got a flute player who's 2 inches from a microphone, it's going to sound like that. So you add a little bit of reverb so it sounds like they're more in a room. But when it sounds like, you know, they're huge in the Grand Canyon, that's not really what a flute sounds like. So I love the reinforcement.
Unless it was in the Grand Canyon.
Unless that's what you're going for.
Yeah, then that's where intent like comes into all of this. Is like I think when I look at this sheet, you know, look at these sheets and you have the different things. It's all about intent, what you want to come across. And I think that the electronic side of it kind of touches every side of this, or can affect every portion of this sheet. When I look at this sheet and I'm thinking as an adjudicator, I think about this as a two-show day. You know, for area you have prelims and finals, and when I'm trying to go through this sheet and I'm like going through the sheet and as Mike was saying, like trying to hit all of those spots, it's like pretty hard, especially on the electronic side, because you might not be dialed in for that room of the day. So you're playing in a stadium you've never been in and you're not dialed in. Your stuff isn't right. So as an adjudicator, it can be tricky to read through that and actually still try to find those spots. So I think in that first read, you know, I think as an adjudicator, you bring up these issues, you know. This is a balance issue, you know, there's too much reverb on that solo for, you know, my taste. Your EQ on that solo, it doesn't sound like a flute player. Like in that first read, I think you're getting those things out, and at that point, it's the job of the band director to get in there, listen to those tapes, and make adjustments for the night show. And then hopefully at that point, you know, you've went through and made a lot of adjustments and really kind of taken that feedback and used that, you know. And then on the band director side, if you get that feedback and you decide that's not what you want to do, then that's not what you want to do, because you're trying to be true to whatever you're trying to present. So for me, it comes down to the intent and trying to get everything to come across clearly.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say, on the same realm, like as a director, I think there's a risk that comes with doing some of these things, because I think there's a misinterpretation maybe of what electronics could potentially be. I think some people think electronics, I'm going to have a giant whoosh in this big electronic sound that's going to have, that's not the intention, I think, of what we're talking about here. It's like, how are you using these elements to enhance what's happening on the field to show off your kids in a way that is going to be, you know, appropriate and mature? And then I think within that, what these guys do great is it's organic. It doesn't affect the quality of what's there. It doesn't affect the intent of what's there. It's just helping to enhance and create. And so I think there's a balance there as a director going into a two-show thing. If you don't have the opportunity to get into a stadium, if you don't have an opportunity to be able to balance that other than on your marching field and on your tower looking down at the kids, that's a risk you take. And you need to know what you can and can't do within your program and your environment, not to just do things because it says on the sheet, well, now I have to use electronics. Do what's best for your program first and foremost and for your kids. If you decide you're going to use those, then you need to create opportunities for the kids to be in a place that you can assess what's actually happening there. And I think just like a judge having to understand that you need to give comments on a first read, like, hey, this could be, if you get another show, this is something you should fix. There's another element on the directors to be responsible with this, that they have to do things that are not going to impact all of the kids on the field by making decisions that are not best for the program. I think, does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah. And I think, you know, for me as a director, when I go into this, sometimes like the intent of what I'm trying to get across is not what the judge is reading, you know, and sometimes that needs a second show for that to come across. You know, I think in the past, when it comes to electronic and balance, the presence of electronics has been an overbalance. And I don't know that that's necessarily a direction that we need to be heading, you know, globally. Now, the presence of electronics within some shows, like if you feel it and you hear it there, it's way too much then. But like if you're presenting something that's pretty modern, like you can't have a modern presentation without that voice being there. So at that point, when you hear that, you know, that's kind of an element of that. So I think when you're putting together your shows, just try to be clear about your intent, and then, that's for this format. We never get to kind of speak with the adjudicator and say, here's what we're trying to do, you know. But on the other side of that, if someone's saying this isn't coming across clearly, your idea is probably not coming across clearly. You know, it's like the hill of artistic integrity is a lonely hill to die on. You know, just because you think it's that, might not be that. You know.
Yeah, I think what we were saying earlier about, the opinion, if is it too much reverb, if it's not, I tend to, when we're talking about that, and really most of the reinforcement stuff, again, since we're reinforcing acoustic instruments, if the sound reinforcement is hampering the sound in any way, that's when you know it's too much reverb if you can't hear the articulation and all the notes blend together, right? And the EQ is not great when there's notes that are just popping out. And the student is not doing that. So especially with the reinforcement, you can kind of skew towards the acoustic instrument and like, okay, what is not sounding correct, and kind of judge it, based on those things. And I think that's a really, really important thing to think of, is just because it may not be what I would choose, doesn't mean it's wrong. The question is it enhancing or detracting from what we're trying to do?
So we've already kind of started down this road in question 2, but I wanted to see if you have any more thoughts. We did kind of begin that question talking about how things are done. Question 2 addresses the what. It's more inside the design standpoint as an adjudicator. And again, I know you've spoken to this already, but I want to see if you have any additional thoughts on the coordination of all performing elements, the effective musical reinforcement we've talked about a fair amount, the suitability, frequency and demand, that's more music and playing, but also content with respect to challenge, or continuity and flow and pacing, and what are thoughts you might have on that with regards to looking at the total ensemble and looking at the blend of all of these elements?
I think a huge statement in the looking at the area sheet, the coordination and effective use of all performing elements, performing being the key word. As an adjudicator, it's so important. We understand a prop is not performing, and a front scrim is not performing, and a tarp laying on the field is not performing. The students are the ones that are being artistic and are the ones that are making the content of the show come across. So I think as adjudicators, it's important that we're able to read through some of the things that may be out there, and we focus on the performing elements. That's one of my favorite things about this sheet, that is the first sentence that is under that content box. So just for all adjudicators, I really want to draw our attention to that idea of performing elements. And then with that, then you get into your ability as an adjudicator to give credit for demand, for frequency of movement, for groups that are, from an ensemble standpoint, that are playing a lot. If I've got 200 kids on the field, how much are those 200 kids really playing their instrument? You know what I mean? This is where you have a chance to reward frequency of movement, frequency of playing, frequency of demand throughout the show, within the guises of making sure that your decision making as an adjudicator is on the actual performers that are making it all happen. So that's the big thing I think as adjudicators we should be careful of. We want to make sure that we are rewarding what the students are conveying throughout the duration of the performance. And it also gives us an opportunity that, from a holistic standpoint, to continue to grow the activity, because as adjudicators, it allows us to give directors feedback on, potential pacing issues. Where are those lulls or those places that feel really transitional, rather than, it feeling like it's part of the seamless whole. You know what I mean? And I think we can continue to progress and move forward with these sheets with the information that we give the directors. And that, that's part of it, not just assigning a number. We create a system of adjudication that continues to progress the activity. That would be my big couple of thought processes on that part of the sheet.
I agree, and I think that what's cool about this change to our sheets is that it allows a judge to decipher between is the problem performance quality of the student, or is the problem the actual design and content of what the student is being asked to do. And those are two separate things to me. Like, are your students not playing in time because you haven't addressed their listening responsibilities, or are they not playing in time because of the content that's there or where they're standing on the field? And we haven't been able to assess that before, and that's as much a part of this performance quality as the actual stuff that they're doing, performing on the field. So yes, I mean, we're talking about, judging the performance quality of what the students are doing, and I think at the same time, like, as a director, what I like about this is you sit there and you can look down the box and go, am I having moments here where the content is actually conducive of what my kids can do? Am I forcing the situation and having this technical moment that my kids are not ready for, and it's actually going to be more of a hindrance on the program than it is actually helping the program? Am I actually creating frequency and movement, frequency and pacing? And it gets you to think as a director, like, sit down before you even start the year and look through your music and look through your drill and make decisions that are going to set your students up for success and actually show these things off on the sheet. And then as a judge, now I get to actually decipher between, I want to talk about this moment that's not great, but this isn't a kid problem. This is actually an issue with the design of what the performance is.
Yeah, that's so key. Like, it gives the adjudicator a way to, actually make values on, like, if the moment is appropriate for the student. I think if you look at the sheet, there's 850 points that the students directly have on achievement. And there's only 150 points on the actual content of what's being offered. And I think when you break that down on the pure math of it, it puts it directly on the students. But now, for me as an adjudicator, that 150 down there, that content area, and kind of gives me a little bit of leadway. I don't want to say leadway, but like, I can take a look at what bands are doing, give students the credit. But then if there's a band that is doing more from a content side and it's more complex, that's the area that I can give them credit. That's the area, that 150 points is where I have to go, this is the difference between the actual demand of what the content is. So I think it's, like, important to look at that and realize it. Like, the 850 points for the students and performers, are they performing what they're being asked to perform? And that's what you're doing. And then the content side, you're looking at, the appropriateness of that content. If it's not appropriate for the students, that's where you can relay that information on a sheet, if that makes sense.
I think that kind of talks to what you were saying earlier, Eric, is like, if you're going to take the risk to put electronics out there, it should be judged. The quality of what it is should be judged. And I think what this box can do in regards to electronics is sit there and go, like, are you using that just for a placeholder in your program to get rid of a bad transition or to fix a horrible release, right? Like, yeah,
I've
exactly.
never done that. I mean,
yeah, ever. None of us have ever in the history of marching band, or pushed it in that direction. So I think it's one of those things that, like, it allows now a judge to sit there and go, like, is what is being asked of the electronic side, is that just, like, for show? Or is it actually the student that's playing it? Like, I can judge that now. I can judge the performance quality that exists there. And it's not affecting the quality of everything else that's happening around it.
Yeah, that's one of my big things. I work with electronics students a lot, and it's really disappointing sometimes when you listen to the tapes and 90% plus of all the comments about these students is they're too loud or too soft, which really those students don't really control. Maybe there's a student obviously at the soundboard, but for those students, that's not what they spend hours and hours practicing on. They practice on their technical abilities and on their musicianship and on their phrasing, just like everything else. I think sometimes because there are adults designing samples, we tend to think, all of the electronic sound I'm hearing are adults, and we're forgetting that there are students that are performing those skills. And when you hear, a great piano lick or any, it doesn't even have to be piano, any other sound from a synthesizer, judge the musicality of that. I would challenge us to think of the musical instrument side of it first, and then the more kind of big picture balance stuff second, because when you're looking at those performance captions, because we're really judging the performance of the students, and that's more important to me, that the students are getting that feedback on what they're spending all their time working on.
I think there's a connection between these two directly, which is the intent of them being on here, right, together. And to me, is the challenge of what the students are being asked to do meeting their performance level. Are those two things the same? You can see bands all the time that will put a challenge out there that the kids can't actually create that quality performance within what they're being asked to do. We've had it here all the time, and you have to make changes to what is being asked of the kids as you get throughout the year. And then is the content appropriate for what you're asking them to do? But in the end, what it comes down to is are you creating great musicianship on the fields? That's still what it comes down to here to me. If you're putting electronics out there, it should be musical. It should be part of the performance and the quality, and that should be judged. If it's not balanced within the ensemble, it should be judged. If you're using mics to enhance something, that should be judged just like you were sitting on a concert stage. And I can't hear the saxophones in this moment because they're the melody here and it's being covered up now by the low brass. Well, that's a problem. Then you should get judged for that element of what you're doing. And I know that this conversation isn't specific to just electronics, but it's part of what we're doing now in the marching world. It's present and it's there, and it should be used appropriately, for sure.
Yeah, I think for this, when you look at the sheets from region to area to state are different. And by the time you get through this process and the bands are at the state level, there is an element of content that needs to be used to adjudicate, to separate these groups, because every band, and I firmly believe this, when you go and you sit and you watch the state prelims, every band is great. The students on that field are excellent at what they do. And as an adjudicator, we're always there from the foundation, region, area, and into the state level. From an adjudication standpoint, you're there to credit the kids. But it gets hard to judge that show if that's the only thing that you're using. So I think that's where the content side of the sheet does really help out in what this is. As an adjudicator, you're using the content to help determine, your rank of these groups and how that's working out. That's what I like about the state ensemble sheet, is that it gives you good criteria to actually make decisions and calls.
Yeah, absolutely. It's self-admittedly, I was originally concerned with the sheet because one of the things I love about the UIL music adjudication system is the amount of credit it gives to musical excellence and achievement, and that it really rewards the how. But there's a big part of excellence that also comes with the what. And the further I dig in, the more I think of my own students, and I want them to get credit for demand. And as we all know, making a band go from soft to loud is difficult when there's a bunch of kids out there. I want them to get credit for being spread out 100 yards and playing something together, and I completely agree, Mike, with that comment, because you get to this level and we do need to provide some more separators. So the groups that are playing their instruments more, the groups that are really working to coordinate a musical continuity and flow to their show, I think it's important that we have a place as adjudicators to reward that. With that said, I think when we're looking at this sheet, and I know we have wonderfully talented people judging at the state level, that we really dig into all the different types of demand. Those demand could be the type of musical challenges we're placing on our students, the type of artistic challenges we're placing on our students. It could be an environmental demand in terms of what picture these kids are having to play this in. Could be a movement and music demand in terms of what they're having to do while they play it. But all of those things, and then making sure it's a well-coordinated product from beginning to end, it gives us a place to separate, what may be very similar levels of achievement from group to group to group to group. Because I know that, we've all sat and watched a competition and we've seen all of these awesome ensembles, and you're thinking to yourself, this is apples and oranges, and it's all so different. How do I don't have a device, if I stick to the sheet, I don't have a device to reward this and, this especially large level of artistic expression or demand that's being placed on the students. And again, that takes me back to my previous comment of the achievement side. It's in terms of the big picture, the achievement side allows us to obviously reward the level of performance that the students are doing. The content side allows us to continue to further the activity and to give the directors constant information on what they can do better. I know we got a great bit of information in 2019 on a similar thing like this. We had a section of our show that was great, really well performed percussion section, but it was pretty transitional. And we were getting these comments at the end of the season. At this point, we're not changing that part of the show, but what it allowed us to do, it allowed us, when we were creating our show for this year, we've reflected back to that several times and gone, are we creating the same kind of transitional feel, or is this section feel like the flow and continuity of the music that's already being played, or are we getting from point A to point B with direction? So again, it was that box and those comments that allowed us to make better choices as we program this year. And I'm sure we'll have the same experience this year. There'll be things with the content of the show that will drive us to make better decisions for next year. So it's not just about what's happening in the moment. It's about that content side of the sheet, furthering the activity moving forward.
I think that's an excellent point because I think there's probably some fear or resistance to that side of the sheet for a lot of people in our state. Not for I want to purposely resist, but maybe there's just a lack of understanding of what that is. And I think if you're someone that's out there that is potentially confused by this, or you don't think this is a strength for you as a director, or maybe you don't have a program coordinator that does this or can't afford one, to me it's very similar to creating a great concert program. How you program a concert. Like we were just talking about this in the office about programming going to Midwest, and that's a super difficult thing to do. Mark's going through the same thing, and it's like that program can't be all music from 1917. People are going to turn their brain off it, and I think it's the same thing. You're sitting next to someone who last year did Mozart on the field, and we played Britney Spears, and you can credit both of those things for quality. Music is music. I think it's how you're doing it and what that content is. So I think it's important that we don't misunderstand this as I'm judging what's out, like what you ask your kids to play, like the actual piece of music. What this is to me is like great pacing is great pacing. Transparency is transparency. Playing in time and playing with the right articulations from section to section is the same thing if you were playing Mozart or Britney Spears or Tchaikovsky. It doesn't matter, or John Adams, whatever it is. And I think that's what's great about this. What he's saying is that, like, as a director, just be really smart about what you're asking your kids to do. Is that piece of music there for you and the effect of it, or is it there to make your kids better and to actually show off the right elements of your program?
Yeah, I think sometimes people are concerned when you add content and you focus on the content that you're going to get content for content's sake. You could read this sheet, frequency/demand of movement while playing. Does that mean I need to move and play as much as possible? Content with respect to challenge. Does that mean everything I have to do is the most challenging thing? No, because if you look at the back of the sheet, you have appropriate frequency/demand of movement, suitable musical content for the performers. So I think it's really important to keep that lens of the challenges that we're asking them to do, and is it appropriate? Sometimes having the front ensemble do this and then come back in cold with a really rubato wind feature is much more challenging than, whatever technical roll section you'll add because you're trying to get your your content points. So I think it's really important, as we're adding more content to the discussion, that we're really always focusing it back to, is this content appropriate? Does it make sense musically?
I think that brings up a great point in maybe not this sheet, but other sheets. We've added percussion performance and brass performance and woodwind performance, and I think that as designers, we're going to have to start to think about how we're presenting stuff for that show, because now we have separate sheets for that, and it is 100% appropriate for the percussion to not play. Does that affect you on the percussion sheet? Gosh, I hope not. As an adjudicator, I'm looking at the percussion sheet from that lens of, is this the right thing for them to do to not play? And sometimes it is 100% the right thing. So it's kind of outside of that sheet, but that brings up a really great point on these new sheets.
Well, that's on all those sheets as well, the appropriateness and the suitability, and those are definitely there on purpose.
Yeah.
So I think when we're talking about percussion, brass, woodwinds, electronics, it's important to know that sometimes the electronics can be the primary voice, and they can carry a moment. And again, we were talking earlier about crediting the performer, to do that, just because there's not a whole, usually when you have woodwinds, you've got, 60, 100 kids, brass, so, we're like, yeah, the band is playing. And just because the music is coming out of the speakers doesn't mean there's not a musician playing that. So when we do get to those transitional moments or whatever, I think it's easy to just kind of like take a break, like, okay, the band's resetting the stage, the percussion is doing that, but to really dive in on the musical challenges. And, on the opposite side, just because the band is playing at the same time as the electronics doesn't necessarily mean that the acoustic musicians are the primary focus. That goes back to what kind of music you do. And, when you're doing the Britney Spears stuff, all those electronic elements are key to doing the piece. And if they're not, on or above in some parts the same level, then you're not doing it justice. If you're choosing, to use those sounds, you really got to take into account the intention of the original piece.
When you're doing a heavily electronic moment, it's weird, as for us, we're used to listening to electronic music and pop music. It's done in a studio. It's precise. We're used to hearing it precise all of the time. And when you're looking and evaluating a moment that is electronic and it's precise and it's great, there's a lot of work that's going into that. I know for me as an electronics designer, I'll be down with the electronics students at a moment like that, watching what they're doing, and my heart is racing. Because it's nerve-wracking. There's a lot going on, and one thing doesn't go right, and that's a blip in the matrix. To use an analogy, that's a blip, and that is huge to the audience and the judge's perspective, because we're used to hearing this type of music precise, perfect, 100% mixed. So it's to do that live the way our rules are set up, which I love the way the rules are set up. It's hard, really hard.
So question number 5, this kind of brings us a little bit down to the bottom of the sheet with regard to how the descriptors are written in scoring specific language. So as an adjudicator, you're now using the descriptors of always, consistently, usually, sometimes, and rarely to determine a score range for a group inside of these sheets. How does that scoring specific language during your judging influence when you're moving into that bottom line score?
I think, looking at it, first of all, I love that it's moved to 5 boxes, if you will. But I also like the fact that the smallest ones are rarely and always. And I think your largest scoring windows are usually inconsistently, which I think allows us to use motivational and positive language with the directors. But I think as an adjudicator, it's important you work backwards by looking at this language and making sure that when you make your commentary, that if it's something that's happened consistently, that you use the word consistently. And it's so important that the evaluation on the commentary aligns with one of these boxes. Oftentimes shooting for something that align with the middle of the box so you don't end up too far in either end, right? But making sure that you are using language, using that word usually, using that word consistently, and then sometimes using that word always up at the top. I look at this as somebody that's going to have to give a tape, and I think of using this sheet at the area and state level when I want the sheet to be encouraging, and I want the tape to be encouraging. I want the tape to give helpful feedback on what to do. And I look at the sheet and see that most of the groups at the upper level are going to fall in some of these bigger boxes, usually consistently, and it allows me to give an educationally appropriate tape while still using the language from the sheet that justifies the number and the place that I put them on the rubric. Now you will have bands at times that would potentially fall into the sometimes or maybe the rarely category at the area or state level. I don't think you're going to see as much of that. That's one thing I really appreciate about the language, and just specifically to the question, as you're adjudicating, you need to be careful that you're not using language like always throughout your tape, and then you put them in the usually category in the middle. That can create a really confusing situation for everybody involved, and especially the director that's trying to make decisions for program improvement.
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what I was going to talk about, is to speak directly to adjudicators. This helps give you a guide for the language that you're using. And for us, I know we've all been in the same place as band directors when we're sitting there listening to a tape and you're like, wow, like, excellent, I'm feeling great about this. And you see a score and it's not reflective of that. And I think there's some power to that, and that this allows us to, as adjudicators, allows us to stay in the right lane as far as the comments and the feedback that we're giving to not only help, but also justify a score that exists there. And then on the flip side, as a director, this allows you too to look at those boxes and go, okay, like, I'm hearing that this is consistent, but it's not always. So this allows me to go in my next rehearsals to plan for, these moments are not strengths of ours right now. I need to take this element of what we're doing and create it a strength. It's the same thing as the box system. It's no different, but what's great about it is it helps an adjudicator that's judging a band like Vandegrift at 8 a.m. in the morning, and then Marcus High School comes in at 5:45 in the afternoon, and how do you place those people in the right place after 9 hours of judging? And this allows you to do that. It gives you a better shot, at least, as getting places in the right area.
I would say it as a challenge, like, if I'm adjudicating, my challenge is, can that director listen to that tape before they've seen the number and know what box or what scoring window they're going to end up in, And I think that is our charge, that's our challenge, to make sure that there's a really strong congruency between the two.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about matching the commentary to the tape, sometimes we can get bogged down if something is consistently not great about talking about it over and over and over and over again, and then you listen to the tape and it's not really helpful. So what I'd really recommend is, if let's say you're in a venue and the subwoofer is it's just too much. It's too much, right? Make a comment once, make maybe a comment twice, and then just jot something down and then move on. And then try, there's so many other things judging on your tape that can be helpful to move on in commentary. And then when you get to your wrap-up section at the end of the tape, go through, okay, so I mentioned it a couple of times, but the sub bass, the whole show was just too much. It really took away. So that way you're getting that feedback, but your tape is more conducive to learning whatever. So don't, if something is consistently not great, or if it's consistently great, put a note, and at the end, like, man, the French horns, the whole show, nails. Every time they played, just awesome.
Great. All right, thanks. So we're going to move these last three questions, and we've got about 15 or so minutes to talk a little bit about as a designer and as a teacher. So this kind of, and I know we've already dealt into this a little bit, but I just want to
being knowledgeable about what you have, strengths and weaknesses of your own organization, and then what you're asking of the kids. Is it possible? Is it going to be achievable? Is that content going to make the daily rehearsal experience enjoyable or frustrating and tedious? I think there's a responsibility in there as directors that You need to know what you're capable of and can do. And I think I'm going to go off topic to come back on topic for a second, but I think what, once again, the sheets allow us to do is focus the judging community into what is important and what the priorities are. And that's tough to do. If you're an 83-year-old judge that's watching a band like Claudia Taylor, who's modern and on edge and doing these, very innovative things, and that's not something you've ever taught before, you need a vehicle and a way to assess that and judge that on the same quality that you would for a Duncanville high school that would be more traditional. And it still plays as well and does as amazing things, but how do you judge between those two? And I think that as a director, to go back to your question, it's your responsibility now within this sheet to not only assess what's there and achieve what's there from, am I doing a musical and beautiful phrase? A musical and beautiful phrase is a musical and beautiful phrase. It's not, it can happen electronically from a battery member to a woodwind feature. That doesn't matter. It's now your responsibility to go, I have excellent clarinets. I am going to make sure that I provide a moment for my clarinet players to show that, so you as a judge can see, like, we can phrase, we can teach a phrase, my kids are mature and can do this, and it's at an appropriate level that they can achieve at really, really high level.
Yeah, the aim of the sheets, I think, is to give, to take a comprehensive look at music education. It's giving credit for woodwind playing, it's giving credit for brass playing, it's giving credit for ensemble performance, visual performance, and it's giving credit for what the students are doing, the musical artistry of what they're doing, the demand of what they're doing. With that said, as a director, the decisions I make for my program and for my students are going to be exactly that. They're going to be for my program and for my students. And I want to make sure I want to make sure in the fall that my woodwinds play their horns a lot. Otherwise spring isn't going to be very fun. And I want to make sure that I'm providing appropriate challenge to all the groups. I'm not going to design a student experience around a set of competitive sheets. With that said, I am happy that the competitive sheets are going to listen to my woodwind players. You know what I mean? So I think it's important that you look at it, just like Robert said, are you creating a vehicle that is musical, that is artistic, and that is going to have all of your students, brass students, woodwind students, percussion students, it's going to have all of them actively involved in the educational experience. And I think if the answer is yes, in my opinion, the sheets are congruent with that answer, you know what I mean? So I just be careful. I think if you dig into, I say, okay, there's going to be a woodwind judge, and all they're going to do is watch my woodwind players, so I need to have a gratuitous woodwind moment every 25 seconds of the show. You know what I mean? That doesn't necessarily make sense with the flow of the musical package. But if you look closely at the sheet, that's not what they're saying, because it does say, is the frequency suitable? So you still design the performance and the show with the students and the community, all of those things at the heart of the intent of what you're doing. I think this just gives us and gives the state an opportunity to put a microscope on each part of the band. And it does challenge me to say, well, I do need to make sure I'm teaching those woodwind players in the fall. You know what I mean? And that I have clarinet sound in my woodwind choir, not just saxophone, right? Sorry, all those saxophone players out there. But we know that's a challenge outside. It's hard to get that clarinet color to speak out in the ensemble. So I would just encourage, yes, have an awareness of the sheets, have an awareness of what's being looked at, but also, the heart of your decision-making lies in the best vehicle for your students and community and for where your program is at and where you want it to go. And to allow that to be your prime decision maker.
I know as a designer, for me, this is probably not the right answer. I'd never think about the sheets. Because the sheets, I know a lot of the programs I write for are going to multiple different circuits. They're going to go to a UIL show, they're going to go to a BOA show, they may go to a US band show. The sheets are all different. So if I'm sitting there with 3 sets of sheets as a designer going like, how can I check off all these boxes? you're down the rabbit hole, and it's hard to do. So it comes back to the intent of the moment and what's right for the program.
I think it's really, you mentioned earlier about, what kind of students you have. Do you have good clarinets? I would take that further to say, what are your strengths as band directors? What is your strength as a booster program? What are your designer strengths? I work with a lot of programs that want to do a lot of super cool, crazy things with electronics, but they don't have someone there day to day who knows how to set it up and work it and all that other stuff. And so you really got to weigh, okay, that effect is really cool if we can pull it off, but do you have someone to do it? Do you have the right equipment? And so really, taking a step back, okay, what is our program good at? What are we not great at? Can we fundraise to bring someone in? Can we not? And what I love about these sheets is if you're good, you're good. If it's a great designed show with all the things, it works. So don't feel like you have to go one way or the other. Don't try to pigeonhole in, a big old electronics moment because you have to have it. You don't. If you can and it's great, awesome. If not, maybe you've got a killer jazz band program. Throw like a jazz quartet out there in the middle, and that's a super cool, unique thing. That's a strength of your program. So really look at your strengths as an entire organization when you're designing what you're going to put out there in the fall.
One of my goals is for every performer on the field to know exactly what they're supposed to be thinking about when they're supposed to be thinking about it. So, if we have a lot of students on the field, so a lot of it will be, at base level, complete awareness of timing understandings. At any point of the show, am I supposed to be watching? Am I supposed to be listening? Am I supposed to be a little bit ahead of the hands, a little bit behind the hands? For every student on the field to understand exactly what their role is from step one to that final hold in the show. By the time we get to that point in the season, we're getting towards the end of the season, there's also our goal is for every student to have a clear understanding of what their musical role in the program is. What, at every point in the season, or every point in the show, what are you trying to convey to the audience? Are we trying to have them up? Are we trying to have them down? Are we trying to have them sad? Are we trying to have them angry? And what different things are we programming each student to do to make that happen? So just, and you take a 14-year-old, I have one of my own, so I know this now more than ever, and you give them 8 minutes of performance, and to really have them dialed in and understanding exactly what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it, every step of that show, that's a challenge to get 300 of those people to do it at the same time. So I think it involves a lot of, we ask questions. If you're on the field at all times, I want my staff to be going to a student saying, hey, what's your timing responsibility here? Hey, what are you thinking about in terms of your role in the ensemble? Or hey, what's your breathing plan? Are you a 1 and 5 breather? Are you a 2 and 6 breather? Which obviously changes depending on where they're at in the drill. But just making sure the students have a firm understanding by asking them, not just by watching, but by asking them throughout a rehearsal, if they know exactly what they're supposed to do and when they're supposed to do it. It can go a long way.
It's a very scary question as a director. Like,
It
if
is.
you ever ask one of your students, who are you supposed to be listening to or who are you supposed to be watching, and you ask a section, and then you have them give the answer, and you have 4 or 5 different answers, it happens all of the time.
You haven't been clear as a teacher.
You haven't been clear as a teacher, and I know for me, like, asking the students and getting that feedback from the students, that's the best way to figure out if I've done my job. And then at that moment, when the students go, they give you 5 different answers, I very rarely view that as a student problem. At that point, you just got to get in and define more. But it's a scary question to ask because you're being very real with yourself. Did we actually do this right?
I think a similar vein to Mike here is that for us on a Thursday before a competition or a big performance, it's about communication and awareness. What are you communicating in this moment? What's the intent of this moment? And for us, we take 5 big moments of the show. That doesn't necessarily mean 5 impacts or loud moments, but if I'm a woodwind player, maybe my big moment is this beautiful lyrical feature in the ballad. And that's my moment. What am I communicating in that moment? How am I getting in and out of that moment as well? So for us, it's big reps. Let's take the first impact of the opener. We're going to go from the beginning of the opener through the next 3 charts after the opener. How am I getting into it? How am I communicating when I arrive? What am I communicating in my volume, my balance, my timing, my intent of that moment in that big moment? And so we'll take 4 or 5 of those big moments of the show, and we'll be repping that over and over and over again and talking about communication, getting the kids comfortable in and out of those moments. Because at that point, you're 1 or 2 rehearsals left before a big performance. You're not fixing woodwind fingers on the field. That's not your intention there. It's not necessarily like a perfect articulation in the trumpet section during this impact. Like, yes, those are important, but that's not what that particular moment is about. Get the kids comfortable. What are you communicating?
Yeah, at some point at the very end, I mean, one of your goals is, I think this is a fun part of the whole process, is you're trying to use all the tools you can to get them in the right mindset for performance. Put them in that space to envision themselves in whatever culminating performance space you're going to be in. Get them comfortable. As a director, when you get up next, if you're a Thursday before a big giant performance, don't change your processes. Make them feel the same that you make them feel every day. Don't get more, don't channel your band director stress at them right before the big show, because that's going to create a bunch of stressed out performances. They need to feel the same system, the same process, the same support, and just have an understanding. I had a big aha moment in 2019. Our music writer came out for a couple of days, and he started asking about the students' understanding of the different intents of the moments of the show. And I started to tell them what their understanding was. And he said, well, let me ask them. And he was standing there with our top band, some of our most experienced students in our morning rehearsal. And this is before, before one of our big shows at the end of the year in San Antonio. And he asked the kid, what are we trying to get across to the audience in this section of the show? And they're just nothing. And I've felt about this big, but it was a great moment. Or can they really, unless they can articulate it, do they really know? And that's a great thing. It's a great point to get to at this point of the season, for them to understand, their role and the artistic part of the show. And I know we're talking about the achievement part, but them getting in the right performance mindset, being comfortable, relaxed, and excited, will create outstanding achievement and dialed in performers. And that's what you want. A way to get 200, 300, whatever kids to all be focused on the same thing at the same time.
I love that, the performance mindset. It's tough, right? Because we do these rehearsals where we're, doing rep, and we're technical. And then we put the whole show together and we're like, no, you need to be expressive, you need to perform, and all these things, and balancing. I think one thing that's particularly tough with performing is when things don't go right, because so often in rehearsal, like, oh, cut, and then it kind of trains you unconsciously to, if something goes bad, you just shut down and then try it again. But when you're in that performance mode, you've got to recover, and you've got to not let it take you out of the moment. I think we've all seen shows where the kids are excited, they come out, they're really amped up, and then like the first like little tear happens, and then all that energy just, it's gone, and everyone's just in like technical survival mode. So I think having an honest discussion with your students about that and said, hey, if something goes wrong, this is the timeline, and you can't go back, and we can fix it in rehearsal later, but in that performance time, you've got to look forward. Okay, that didn't go well, all right, I'm back in, all right, and put it out of your mind. And I think when you see, for me, some of the best performances are not the perfect ones. They're the ones with like an error, and just the recovery is so seamless and flawless. To me, that's the true mark of a professional level performer. Is not that mistakes don't happen, but when they do, the recovery is like you almost don't notice it, or you notice it in a really good way.
I do a lot of if-then with my students. Like, if this happens, what are you going to do? I mean, and I know for us at Leander, we'll do a lot of electronic moments. I remember it was 2018 maybe, we did a side-to-side battery thing. They were separated by like 80 yards on the backside line, playing simultaneously back and forth. We used some wireless technology for that, but wireless technology is wireless technology. You know, I'm pretty good at it, but I even mess that up at times, you know? And we had lots of shows where that didn't happen. So what happens when it doesn't work, you know? I know for me, when I'm going into these big shows, I start to go into paranoia mode, healthy paranoia mode. I'm looking for all the things that are going to go wrong, and how can I teach my students in the moment to figure that out. You know, at 2019 at Grand Nationals at finals, like we had a redundant main stage rig set up, designed for if one fails, the other one works. Well, what happens if both fail? Which is what happened at the end of our opener, you know, going into Britney Spears, which is, 45 seconds of only electronics. What happens at that moment? You know, thankfully the kids were trained enough to figure out how to fix and diagnose their issues and get that back up there. So I go into, the last couple of days into the show, I'm in healthy paranoia mode. Like, what if this happens? And the kids are like, this guy is crazy. And I'm like, but no, it's going to happen.
Because we've lived it. It has happened.
Yeah.
I think with electronics students in particular, for some other people, like, you know, if you drop your flag, you know, you finish out the choreo and you grab it when you can, or like if your reed is chipped, then you just finger along and you march along your drill. But if your computer shuts down or something, don't just stand there and pretend to play, fix it. And you'd be surprised. You think it's intuitive, like, oh, the computer's broken, go fix it. But especially in that performance mode, if they're not prepared, they're like, I'm being judged. And if I do this, I at least look like I'm doing, and they're not noticing. But at the same time, you're having all these things missed. So having that conversation with the students, exactly. If this goes wrong during the show, stop everything you're doing and don't go back to playing until it's fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing I wanted to add on to this is that I think looking at these sheets can seem overwhelming for someone. I think hearing us talk about all these elements can seem overwhelming for someone. In the end, what this does is it achieves musicianship. And that's what it comes down to. You're sitting on a concert stage, you want to hear great phrasing, great dynamics, beautiful articulation, and quality tone. It's not any different than what you're playing on the field. It should just be a vehicle that allows your students to do it. Nothing has changed. I wouldn't say nothing has changed about what we're trying to appreciate and the quality of what it is. All this is doing is giving more detail for a judge to be able to adjudicate it appropriately. I don't think that we should guide our rehearsal techniques and guide what we're saying to our students based upon a UIL sheet. I think we need to avoid things like, was that a Division I sound? Is that going to be acceptable at state marching contests? Those are not things that you should guide anything that you say towards, right? One, like, do your kids know what a Division I sound is? Do you know what a Division I sound is? And I think that good is good and not good is not good. And I think that we need to talk in musical terms constantly all the time. We need to talk in the way the students are performing all the time, the intent of what we're doing, like Mike was saying over here. That is where we should guide all of our information. And in the end, as a judge, you know what quality is, and you're going to appreciate that no matter what the content is. And now we get to look at the content and get feedback on the content, and is that affecting the quality? Now those two things are in a relationship, and that's super important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Texas bands are known for how they play their instruments, how they play as ensembles, and it's not. It's not a coincidence that Texas also happens to have a single organization that evaluates all of the concert bands and all of the marching bands in the state. You know, one of the reasons Texas Band is because of the UIL system. I think there is a nervousness with the content side of these sheets, and again, I have gone to embrace the content side of these sheets because of, again, that first sentence that says effective coordination of performing elements. And, are we really creating and working to continue to create the benchmark for what music is in this country if we are not making sure that we have a sheet that pushes directors for musical shape and artistry, that pushes directors for making sure that we address appropriate demand with all the difference of the sections, and make sure that we, as Robert talked about, that we create a program just like we would if we were doing a concert program that all works, that all flows and all makes sense from beginning to end. And I think that left side of the sheet is going to help continue to drive us forward while we focus on achievement. But there is more to musical excellence than just achievement. There is artistry and the decisions we're making as teachers for how we're educating our band programs. So I've gotten into much more of a mode of embracing this as I look closer at the sheet. And for everybody that's looking at these sheets for the first time, I just highly encourage you to look closely at the language on the front and the back of the sheet to have a clear understanding of the why behind how all of this stuff works together. And it's just a huge kudos to the group that has spent a bunch of time behind the selection of all these different words. I mean, these weren't haphazardly selected words and language. They were very carefully selected and very, very carefully placed on the sheet. And it's something that I'm sure will continue to be evaluated as we continue to improve and progress the system, again, to make sure that Texas is still the place in the United States for band and how we play our instruments and how we play as ensembles.